Today's big question: why does the English language contain so many words from other languages? And don't think that this is an easy one, because when it comes to borrowing words from other languages, no one can beat the English. To answer that question, we must travel back in time all the way to the beginning of the English language. The Celtic Britons were still there, and they weren't going anywhere. And because of the large number of words that English borrowed from these languages, during the Old English period, the language slowly began to change. That is to say that for several hundred years, the language didn't really change all that much. And this stability had a lot to do with the Norman conquest of England in 1066. By the 20th century, the English language contained words from basically every language in the world. Do you know any other weird facts about the English language? Share them below. And remember, if you want to hear more stories about the strange and wonderful world of languages, stay tuned for more. Today, the English language is often called a Creole language, which means that it has evolved from a mixture of different languages. And this linguistic melting pot has given English its unique flavor, and has allowed it to become the dominant language of the world. The Normans, who were basically Vikings that had settled in northern France, brought with them a new language, Old French. For a while, Old French was actually the dominant language in England, and English was relegated to the status of a low language spoken only by peasants. But the dominance of Old French didn't last forever. As the centuries wore on, English gradually re-emerged as the dominant language of England. However, its vocabulary remained largely unchanged because of the stability brought on by the standardization of the language in the 5th-10th century. This meant that English didn't borrow many words from other languages during this period. By the end of the Old English period in the 11th century, the language had changed so much that someone who spoke Old English would unnecessarily be understood by someone speaking modern English. When the English went exploring, conquering, and generally getting up to their usual antics, they took their language with them. And when they came across people who spoke other languages, they did what any reasonable people would do. They made the other people learn English, and then they adopted some of the other languages' words. For example, when the English encountered the Zulu people in South Africa, they adopted the word safari into their language. Similarly, when the English took over India, they adopted the word bung, and when they went to Alaska, they adopted the word kayak. And of course, they didn't just adopt words from indigenous languages, but also from the languages of the countries they conquered. For example, when the English conquered France, they adopted many of its words, such as cuisine, ballet, and bourgeoisie. However, their languages would be mutually intelligible, kind of like how a speaker of modern Spanish and Portuguese could understand each other. This meant that the Anglo-Saxons had to interact with the Britons quite frequently, whether it be trading or, not getting murdered by them. And this interaction led to a fair amount of cultural and linguistic exchange between the two groups. For example, some scholars believe that the Anglo-Saxon invasion of Britain was actually helped along by a few traitorous Britons, who did not like the way that their people were being ruled by the Romans. And because the Anglo-Saxons needed the help of the Britons, they were more than happy to adopt some of their language. In the 5th century, a group of Germanic tribes known as the Anglo-Saxons settled in Britain. After the Roman Empire pulled out of the island, these tribes spoke a language known as Old English or Anglo-Saxon English. Old English was very different from the English spoken today. In fact, a native speaker of modern English could understand Old English about as easily as they could understand Spanish. The French have tried and the Spanish have tried, but the English are the true champions. Even the most conservative estimates suggest that around 60% of the words in modern English come from other languages. So why did the English go on this word borrowing spree? However, the Anglo-Saxons weren't the only ones living in Britain. In fact, it wasn't just the Britons. The Anglo-Saxons also came into contact with speakers of Old Norse, Old French, Latin, and Greek. But then something interesting happened. The English language went through a period of stability, but then something crazy happened. The English began to travel all over the world. And as the English continued to spread around the world and make friends with everyone, their language continued to grow and evolve. Now you know why English has so many words from other languages.